Our next session is entitled Protecting Our Equine Athletes, which is pretty self-explanatory, but is also absolutely crucial. We've seen, including this year, sadly, the impact that catastrophic injury has on the sport, and we are always striving as a global industry to improve in this area. Our panel will be up very shortly, but first of all, to give his address, please welcome the Head of Veterinary Clinical Services for the Hong Kong Jockey Club and a man who has worked as a racetrack practitioner and a veterinary regulator for over 4 decades, Brian Stewart.
Thank you. I'd really like to express my appreciation to the IFHA for the opportunity to speak today. This is a topic that's very close to my heart. It's something I've worked on for a long time. It's also a very complex topic, very large topic. I'm afraid my presentation is going to be something of a whirlwind, but in a way it has to be because there is so much to be said. That's a little bit about me to provide some context, but as was mentioned, I've been sort of 4 decades in the job one way or another. And with regard to fatalities, I think I've added up over that period that I've managed directly or very closely associated with, I think, well over 300 fatalities in racing, might be getting up to 400. So at the time, I sort of think it's a job to be done efficiently and humanely. It's an essential part of the sport. When we have injuries, we've got to deal with them. But with a little bit of perspective and reflection, it is a very large number. So minimising injuries has been something of an obsession of mine for quite some time. And while statistically, as a percentage, racing deaths are low, they are very high impact, as we've seen, and we really need to do more. We do a lot, we've made a lot of progress, but there's still more to be done. Now, this is a front or title slide of a presentation my colleague Kenneth Lamb and I gave in 2010 at one of the International Conference of Racing Analysts and Veterinarians. Now, I put that up because in this presentation we sort of laid out our wish list as what we would like to have available to us that might make a difference. It might help us do our job better, might help us protect horses better. Now, the good news is that many of those things that we wished for at that time are now available to us or are on the verge of being available to us. And we actually now do have the tools to make a significant difference if we apply them. So there's a few questions we need to ask. There's no doubt, we've mentioned the threat before, but realistically and practically, what can we do to reduce injuries? And we've been doing a lot, but we do need to do more. So how do we do that? We need to take advantage of these new technologies. We need to look at how we regulate. We need to look at how we can integrate new technology, new learning into the industry while still retaining the sport as we know it. We've also got to look at how we drive that change. It's all very well having the tools, but if we don't implement them, don't use them, we won't make much progress. Or, as an industry, do we accept that injuries are always going to be with us? We do our best to keep them low, but perhaps they're an inevitable consequence. And especially because we have to achieve and deliver elite athletic performance. So do we go, oh, that's racing, which I hear far too often. So we have actually, well, certainly Hong Kong and many places, we've reached a plateau of performance, I call it. We're flatlining in terms of our reductions in injuries. We've probably reached a point where the law of diminishing returns is catching up with us, and we're struggling to find ways that we can improve even further. Now, I think if we keep going the way we are, the best we can hope for, or at least in the Hong Kong context and perhaps the Australian context, is that we have 1 fatal injury every 2,000 runners. I find it very hard to think how, in our current way of doing things, we can get below that level. We go up and down, but it always reverts to a mean, which is often somewhere between 0.5 and 1 fatality for every 1,000 runners. So we've already worked very hard, but we are stuck on this plateau, this flat line. So people often ask me, what should be our target? And, the natural feeling is to say 0. Now, that's probably not going to happen. But this is an interesting opinion piece that one of my colleagues, Chris Riggs, wrote for the Equine Veterinary Journal. And Chris actually first put this contention forward about 20 years, and I remember rolling my eyes and being very sceptical. But now, I think that we have a better understanding of the causes of fatal injuries, and we have this emergence of new technologies. He might not be all that far wrong. So with the right insight, nearly every catastrophic injury resulting in death of a flat racehorse could be foretold and thus prevented. It's a big statement, but I'm starting to come around to Chris's point of view. So actually, what do I think is realistic? I think probably we should be able to get to about 1 in every 5,000 runners. There will always be misadventure, but what we want to be able to intervene and manage are those injuries that are pre-existing before a horse goes into a race, and these can be extremely difficult to detect. We talk about pre-race inspections and regulation, but it's really quite unfair to expect pre-race examiners to be able to detect some of these injuries. They're virtually silent, but during the stress of a race, they let go, and we have our catastrophic injuries. Now, the root cause is bone fatigue. It's just caused by overstress, or perhaps inappropriate stress would be a better way to put it. And it's very similar to metal fatigue, but there is, affects aircraft and machinery. But there is one big difference, is that bone can adapt itself to become stronger in response to stress, if we give it a chance to, and it can repair itself if we give it a chance to. So if you'd like to learn more about this, it's a big topic, but it's really, I think, very critical that everybody here understands the concept. Chris gave a presentation recently in the UK, and it's available on this YouTube address. I strongly recommend you have a look at it and take it in. It explains a lot. So I mentioned before, it is very, very difficult to identify those warning signs of bone fatigue. They're rarely show lameness, rarely any heat, rarely anything you can find. In fact, I went through one of my self-improvement phases where I looked at my results of my pre-race inspections, and I've done many, and the single biggest indicator of a horse that was going to break down was a perfectly sound horse with clean legs. It's very hard work. And that's this overstress also is responsible for many other conditions that cause welfare problems in horses, osteoarthritis and Palmer osteochondral disease, bleeding and other things. And these all impact significantly on the quality of life of a horse, the ownership experience, costs, even the suitability of horses to go on to future careers. Once they're damaged, a lot of these changes are very hard to reverse. But they needn't happen, or in many cases they needn't happen. So some key principles I think we have to take in mind. If we're going to start an injury minimisation program, we have to go back to some principles. And it's an old one, but prevention is better than cure. We don't want to be having to deal with damaged athletes right from the start. You're behind, putting stresses on other parts of the skeleton. It just gets complicated. So if we can somehow manage their training and development so that they get through that strong and well conditioned to the job we're going to ask them to do, a lot of our problems diminish dramatically. And a sound, happy, healthy horse is going to be much more likely able to deliver peak athletic performance. And the other principle is that bone can adapt and it can repair, but we've got to give it a chance to. So I guess this is a sort of overall strategy type of thing, but A lot of emphasis is put on diagnosis and regulatory barriers for horses racing, but it starts a lot earlier than that. And we've got to be able to, and it's not our job, but we've got to be able to somehow influence the training and racing workload of horses so that they don't get pushed into this, what I call the danger zone for bone fatigue. And then if horses are pushed towards into that zone, we have to be able to have systems to be able to detect that as early as we possibly can, so we can intervene one way or another, whether it's the trainer adjusting the workload, whether it's veterinary treatment, or whether it is a regulatory sort of stand-down period, perhaps. And then if we do have a problem and things start going amiss, we have to be able to achieve an accurate diagnosis, and that will guide our future management of that horse. And that hasn't always been possible. Really, in the last, so perhaps 5 years, a lot of the technology, 5 years previously, just wasn't generally available. And sometimes we just didn't really know what we were looking at. So it's, things are now coming together, and I'm really sort of quite hopeful that we might be able to make a significant difference. Sorry, I missed my slide. But what's the Hong Kong Jockey Club doing in terms of prevention? One of our major initiatives has been the Chung Fa Racecourse, and there are a lot of reasons why the racecourse training centre was built, but a very important one is the welfare and safety of horses. The facilities there are magnificent, and horses appreciate it, they do well there. And providing good training surfaces, good facilities, good rehabilitation, cross-training alternatives has been a very important part of our strategy to help manage horses and prevent them being pushed into that zone where they're at more risk of injury. Some of the more facilities as well there. And we invest a lot in veterinary input and equipment, and regular inspections of horses after gallops, after races, after barrier trials is becoming more and more popular, and I think it's a very useful tool. It gets into that early detection, early intervention sort of mindset where you get onto a problem quickly and manage it before it escalates. We've also moved towards using technology. It's quantitative lameness detection and AI based on videotapes of horses trotting up. Now, I was sceptical about that as well. I was a bit inclined to the idea that, I've got eyes, I've got ears, I've got fingers, I can sort it out. But that's probably a bit arrogant, but there are a lot of people of that sort of mindset. And nothing can replace the experience and intuitive skill of an experienced practitioner or an astute trainer. But not everybody is, an excellent practitioner or an astute trainer. We have people coming up learning, and these are excellent learning tools that help spread that expertise and flag issues that might otherwise be missed for further attention. So that's one of the AI systems, just a video taken on an iPhone, gets analysed and comes back with that guide. It's really useful for stable checks and for confirming. We've looked at studies of vets, even vets looking at lameness, and there's a remarkable inconsistency even between picking which leg's lame. So artificial intelligence provides some consistency. And it's the lameness locator based on accelerometers. It provides a quantitative measure of lameness that can be used to communicate, can be used for nerve blocks or whatever to see what's actually going on. Again, maybe an experienced vet doesn't need it so much, but a lot of us are not quite so good. Lameness is actually really tricky. And this provides a means to measure and also to monitor as a horse goes through its rehabilitation to see what's happening. So that's useful. Now, biometrics, they were mentioned earlier, and I really think these have the potential to revolutionise the way we do, where we train and the way we manage our horses. it's really quite difficult to imagine an elite human sports team that doesn't have biometrics as part of its program. It's universal there. It's now just starting to take off in horses, and we've been working with it a bit in Hong Kong, and I'm very impressed by the results that we're getting. This is the title of a paper one of our vets at Hong Kong has produced on a trial he's doing with biometric systems that was presented at the International Conference of Racing Analysts and Veterinarians just recently. He's taken biometric measurements, ECG, gait, recovery parameters, combined that with post-barrier trial scopings. The measurements were taken on horses that competed in barrier trials. He collected about 600 individual barrier trial performances. We're at the process of analysing them now. This is a report on the pilot study. And the biggest study now is currently with our team being analysed. And the early results are really, really interesting. Probably be published later next year, but this is, I think, where we've got to go. We've got to learn how to use this technology. That's the dashboard that one of the systems we've been working with Araneo, a French company. That's the sort of information it can provide. It's worth a whole day workshop if you wanted to learn more. It's another one of the dashboards. Appears on the iPhone or an iPad, laptop, whatever, and provides immediate feedback to the trainer. Our trainers who've adopted it are now, I wouldn't say becoming dependent on it, but they like it very much. If we're going to rely and introduce technology, I think it was mentioned before on the IFHA presentation, we've got to help people make that change. We are a very conservative industry. There is quite a resistance to technology, and I see it. I mean, I can't help but feel it sometimes myself, but if we're going to make that difference, we've got to integrate the horsemanship and the technology so that we can improve both, actually. So I do wonder if we shouldn't be looking at some sort of compulsory education and certification program for participants. Might be challenging, but I think it's going to be necessary. The other thing is we need to look beyond our own industry at times. This is the title page of a presentation we had at a Jockey Club seminar recently. Tim Gabbett's a human sports consultant who works with elite athletes around the world, and his area is workload management and injury prevention. Very, very interesting guy. He's widely published, worth looking up if you'd like to know a little bit more about what's happening in the human world. You know, horses and humans are different, but a lot of the principles are very much the same. Interestingly, one of Tim's messages was that training hard is actually a good preventative for injury. I think you referred to it as a vaccine for injury, but it's got to be done smart. So undertrained horses will get injured, overtrained horses will get injured, and getting that balance right is part of the art of training, but it is also something that technology can help us with. So the next phase is trying to identify those horses that have entered a danger zone. How do we've tried to prevent it. Now we're getting to a phase where we're suspicious something might be going on. And we've got to get in there early. We've got to make a detection as early as possible, and we've got to make an intervention as early as possible, whether that's training or veterinary input or whatever. So it means looking at horses often. So we do veterinary examinations again, and this all merges with prevention. It's all one continuum. And another thing we're looking at is racing epidemiology. We're basically looking at the probability of injury under a certain set of circumstances. Now, this is a paper that was presented at the recent International Conference of Racing Analysts and Veterinarians. It's been based on Hong Kong Jockey Club horse records. And we were looking at how, by big data analysis and statistics, we might try and identify horses that are at increased risk because of the track work they've done before, because of their veterinary history, because of multiple things coming together, to see if a predictive model based on an algorithm can identify those horses that are potentially at risk. And it's done surprisingly well. It's not, perhaps only Hong Kong can do it at the moment, but it's not that complicated, and it may be something we can look at in the future, to just look at when horses, who are all individuals, but when the average horse starts to do this particular workload intensity and has pre-existing veterinary conditions, the probability of that horse going amiss in the next sort of 2 weeks or something, might be 85, 90%. It's not guaranteed, but it does put it in that zone where we target in and have a look at it. Now, biometrics also have a very big role to play in that area. As I said, I really do think that biometrics are going to make a very big difference. There's another dashboard there. Certainly, Stride Safe, which Naya is looking at. Araneo does the same thing. We're looking at various systems that we might be able to apply in Hong Kong. It's early days, but the results look quite promising and probably will get better as it's refined with time. And my personal holy grail, which is biomarkers, which would be a blood test that could show when a horse was under, or its skeleton was under significant stress. It's expensive, it's still a lot of work to be done, but if we ever do get there, it'll be a major step forward. This is the title page from a presentation at our Jockey Club internal seminar that we did about messenger RNA. Alan Page from the University of Kentucky. There are other groups working, but we're working with Alan to try and do what we can to help his work and to support the fast track the development of messenger RNA as an indicator of musculoskeletal stress. So we could use that screening. We could perhaps identify horses that are under pressure, horses that are entering this danger zone, horses that are starting to go amiss or show clinical signs. We've then got to, achieve a diagnosis and a prognosis. We've got to work out what is actually going on. And we've been limited in a way in the past with what we could do, but now some advanced imaging technology is becoming available. It's expensive, it's time-consuming, it's disruptive to a horse's training regime, but sometimes it's essential. So we have these potential options. Really, over perhaps a decade ago, we only had radiology and ultrasonography. Scintigraphy was available at specialist referral clinics, but was a complicated process. So scintigraphy, very, very valuable, but uses radioactive materials. It's time-consuming. It means horses are out of action for some time, but sometimes it's indispensable. And CT scanning, this is at Hong Kong. We've introduced CT scanning. Really interesting, really we see a lot that we wouldn't otherwise see. It certainly helps us a lot, but it's a complicated process and a time-consuming process, perhaps more like it. And we can't use it in every case or for every pre-race inspection, or it's just not practical. And we have MRI, that's as MRI plus a CT to help us better define what's going on. We have MRI, there's MRI plus plain radiography, again helps us better define what's going on and be able to give people an answer and be able to assess whether a horse is suitable to race. PET scanning, I think that's probably going to become the gold standard because it looks at actual activity in bone. Seems to be quite nice for sesamoid or imminent prodromal signs, I guess, of sesamoid injury, which in Hong Kong is one of our major problems and extremely difficult to detect. This seems to work quite well. but we still face the problem that we've got to be able to screen those horses and identify which horses are going to benefit from the procedure. So sometimes we're left with, especially as we're introducing new technology, we have to be impressed, but we've also got to ask, what does it all mean? Sometimes we don't really know. CT imaging of racehorses in training is still relatively new in terms of the volume, and interpreting the significance of problems can be quite challenging. Now, that's where research comes in, and the Hong Kong Jockey Club has established the Equine Welfare Research Foundation. I think it's something like $600 million Hong Kong was put towards it. It's already funding a lot of important work, and it is, I think, research is going to be the only way we're going to be able to apply these new toys effectively. And we've also got to use it on horses that are in training. It's no point doing things on ponies or retired racehorses. We have to learn, what is happening in elite racehorses in training, and that can be difficult to get volunteers to participate in these sort of projects. Even collecting blood can be a problem sometimes. But to be able to make sound decisions, we've got to research on the subject that we want to know about, and that's the racehorse in training. And we've got to validate our technology. If we're going to be making decisions, we've got to be confident that our models and our ideas are sound. It's all very well for me to have a theory, but it won't. If we head off down the wrong road, we will perhaps do more harm than good. So it's time-consuming, it's expensive, but it's certainly necessary. Now, regulation, I come from a regulatory background, although I've retired from that, and perhaps I've got a more clinical perspective now. But I don't know that more regulation is going to be the answer. There are various ideas floating around about what we should be doing, and a lot of them are aimed at trying to ensure that horses get sufficient rest, that we don't push them into that danger zone, that if they do have a problem, they prove that they're fit to return to racing. I think Hong Kong's probably gone as far down that road as we can. Perhaps there is work that would be useful in other racing authorities. I think medication, we've got that right. I don't think there's much scope for getting any tougher on medication. In fact, medication used judiciously is a very good thing. I think probably education is going to be important. And I mentioned before about, I think we ask too much of our pre-race veterinary examiners. It's very difficult to pick these horses. So it's got an important role, but we need to be careful about how we do that, and there are risks associated with over-regulation. And we can't make racing too safe. We've got to make it safe, but it is a test of elite athletic performance, and it must always remain that. And we can't become overly dependent on technology. We can't take away the human factor. And if we do make decisions that are on unvalidated models or unsound evidence, we're adversely affecting participants unfairly. We need to be quite sure of what we're doing and make sound decisions. So if we're going to go down this route of technology, we need to make sure that we've got good people to be able to run the systems. It needs competent, I think veterinarians will have a big role to play, but they've got to be experienced, they've got to have suitable temperament, they've got to have expertise, they've got to have risk assessment skills, people skills, decision-making skills. If it's going to work, we need good people. And how do we recruit and retain these people? Well, if you're going to do it ad hoc, good luck, because it's very, very hard to find the right people. I think we need a structured system to train and develop these people. And as I mentioned before, I don't think we should rely on technology to the point that we're going to try and replace the experience and learning, intuitive skills of a master horseman or an elite vet. But it's a fact that not everybody is that or can be that. And, you know, in a way, we've got to cater to the lowest common denominator in some ways if we're going to impact on injury. And technology, I think, provides a way to fast-track learning and to help people become good or safe at their job much more quickly. And the other thing is execution, because, you know, I've got this great plan, this strategy, but it's not going to do much good if we don't execute it. And that's, I think, a point everybody must be pretty aware of. And execution is the challenge. It's easy to dream up plans, but we've got to put them into action, and that I think will be our big challenge. So can we dictate it from the top? My experience that our participants don't respond well to that, and change, as Natalie referred to, has its challenges, but we certainly need strong visionary leadership. We're facing a crisis, but at the same time, we're starting to get the tools we need to be able to address that crisis. And I seriously think we're on the verge of being able to do some really meaningful work. So to our racing leaders, what do we need to do? Got a long list there. Some of it revolves around communication. I think we do have to get widespread understanding of how accidents or fatalities happen, and they're not actually accidents. They're time bombs sitting there just waiting to go off. And track surfaces, of course, are really critical, but often they just apply extra stress that tips the balance of a pre-existing injury. So also, I think we really have to understand the opportunities that technology offers us and to grasp them. I've mentioned the importance of research and development, and we've got to be able to communicate that information to people who are not necessarily receptive to having science and technology pushed upon them. I get that, I totally get it, and it will be a real challenge. How do we get samples and data from horses in training? That's going to be very challenging as well. Do we mandate the use of some of this technology? Do we make horses, as with the Stride Safe system, all horses have to wear it during training and racing perhaps? How do we influence and affect mindsets? Natalie addressed that earlier this morning as well. We've also got to show common sense. We can't plunge in without sort of a very informed and clear idea of what we're trying to achieve, and the technology we're trying to achieve is up to the job. We don't want to be hyper-cautious or risk-aversive. That's going to, again, affect what racing is all about. There is always going to be an element of risk. We've just got to reduce it to as low as we possibly can. I think we do have to look at personnel. I'm a bit veterinary orientated, I guess, but a lot of this will depend on good, sound veterinary input. And I think everybody in the industry has to accept that horses are flesh and blood, and sometimes we just ask too much of them. So I started off with the idea that, can we keep racing as a spectacle, as a test of elite performance? And I think, yes, we can. And those are the things we will need to do. And I think we're in a very good position to do that. So I'll close on that point. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Brian. I'd like to invite you to take a seat here. Thank you so much. And I'd like to invite up to the stage the remainder of our panel. So please put your hands together. First of all, for the Director of Equine Regulation, Safety and Welfare at the British Horse Racing Authority, James Given, ladies and gentlemen. The President of the Delmar Thoroughbred Club, Josh Rubenstein, is here with us today. And the Head of the Stud Book and Doping Control from France Gallo here in Paris, Sonia Vitrek, is here as well. Sonia, welcome to our panel. I know, Josh, you wanted to begin with a few opening remarks, so I'll hand the floor to you just to set the scene for us, if you will, and perhaps respond to what you've heard from Brian.
Sure. I will. I'd like to start out by saying, while I'm not an overly religious person, I do believe in the racing gods. And if the racing gods are listening, I want them to know that while we've had some success, some really good success at Del Mar and in California with safety, there's much more to be done. We need to continue to work harder and smarter and provide the best possible environment for our equine athletes.
What's the best thing you've done in California in this area?
There's been a change in culture, and I think as most people in this room know, 2019, California went through a very difficult time. Coming out of that, stakeholders and a regulator, the California Horse Racing Board, we enacted the most stringent reforms in North American racing. And those include extremely restrictive medication reforms and veterinary oversight. But we've really had that buy-in from horsemen and women, and it wasn't easy at first. But I think everybody at the time knew how serious a point we were in 2019, and fortunately we're all rowing in the same direction, and the results have been very positive.
Brian, I want to come back to you if I may. There was many things that stuck out to me there, but one line particularly, when you said medication used judiciously is a very good thing. Perhaps it's all about education. How important is it now that people know when medicating is good and when medicating is bad and why? And do we need to do a better job as an industry of getting that message outside, for example, these four walls?
Clearly it's critical. And I do wonder if it's a matter of people not knowing or not caring, that wanting a short-term fix in face of perhaps what might be the longer-term benefit of the athlete. There is always that temptation when you've got a horse ready for a race and you get a small niggling problem, or apparently a small niggling problem, and medication will solve that problem temporarily. The temptation is very, very large, which is why we have regulation. Certainly, I think education generally is really, really important. And I think there has been a major change in culture. I was in practice many years ago. It was a cowboy culture in a lot of ways. But there has, over the last probably 10 years, I think, been a major change in people's perceptions and responsibility in the use of medication.
James Given, there's clearly, and we can see it in the room here, a growing global awareness that as we work together to improve equine welfare and keep societal approval, it's a requirement for the sport to grow and thrive. But for those who don't see it that way, what do you think the strongest points are to change their mind?
Goodness, that's quite difficult. I mean, it comes back to education. Right across the stakeholder groups of an acknowledgement that there is a problem, recognising that the wolves may not be quite at the gates yet, but they're heading that way. I mean, we have in Britain 35% of our racing is jump racing, so it's a significant portion. And naturally, if animals are jumping obstacles, they encounter more problems, and we have worse rates than in that part of our racing than Brian was talking about earlier. And that community, I think, have acknowledged that there are problems, and they are embracing change. Our flat community, perhaps not quite so. And I think it's just trying to educate and demonstrate that we have to change, and listening to the wider message from meetings like this, from colleagues across different jurisdictions, that we have to sit up and pay attention and change.
Sonia, what's been your experience here in terms of how the thoroughbred industry, how owners, trainers respond to these challenges?
First of all, we built a working group with trainers and vets to work on this subject, because the main problem, we speak about medication limits, and for example, we have one problem with intra-articular injection. How is the limit between treating and give comfort to the horse for the welfare issue, So this is a tricky point. How many infiltration or intra-articular injection can we give a horse? And if the worst case happen, a horse die on a racetrack, and suddenly the people realize that this horse has run many races in a year and had given many infiltration, maybe 10 in a year, I think we will have a big problem. So this is a reflection we have to have all together. How many races per year do we give to a horse? How many intra-articular injection can we give to the horse for the welfare perspective?
I mean, this is a particularly hot topic across the world, and you'll be very familiar with this as well, Josh. Injecting joints, injecting straight into the joints, essentially, whether that is curative, whether you're doing it to cure a problem, or whether it's just being done routinely and prophylactically, and how responsible or irresponsible that might be. What's the position in Southern California on this now?
So here's what we've experienced in California. California used to have a 14-day stand-down time for intra-articular injections. The last 12-month period where we had that 14-day stand-down time, for the year there were 60 fatalities due to fetlock failures. We increased the stand-down time to 30 days, and the fatalities were reduced to 10 to fetlock failures. So it's hard to argue with those numbers. Currently, IFHA has a 14-day stand-down time. We have had significant conversations with IFHA, both stakeholders in California and our regulator, and we feel confident and are very hopeful that IFHA will be going to a 30-day stand-down period shortly.
And what's been the feedback from the industry? You clearly have come up against resistance in the first instance. Is there now acceptance?
Yes, because people have seen the results. Initially, there were some horsemen and women that didn't like the change. But as I said earlier, we were at a tipping point in 2019 in California. If we did not change things dramatically, there may not have been an industry. So I think now that people have seen what those positive results are, there's much less pushback.
Brian, I thought you were treading that line deliberately sensitively between expert opinion and science and something a little more anecdotal and, dare I say the word again, homespun, that you might receive from trainers and those closely connected with horses. How tricky a balance is that to strike for you? Respecting the horsemen and women, but also making them realize that science is all important.
Yeah, it's very tricky, and in some ways I'm in the other camp because I come from that background in private practice. We worked with trainers. We had to depend on our intuitive skills, and we didn't like to be dictated to. We thought we knew. So I understand. I get it completely. But at the same time, where we have opportunities to improve, we've got to grasp them and bring people along with us. And no, it's not easy at all. We do struggle with that in Hong Kong. We struggle with that in Australia. Tell me, Dr. Stewart, how many Group 1 horses have you trained? And that would be 0. So it's difficult for me to sometimes argue with a very experienced, competent trainer, because they know their horses and they know what's going on. They've had 40 years of experience behind them. So it is a tricky balance. We've got to bring people along. We've got to introduce that new technology. We've got to help people to get better. But at the same time, we can't disregard their experience and their skills.
I was thinking particularly about your biometrics and how much you have faith in biometrics to make our horses sounder and keep us moving better.
Well, that took me some time. I had to see it with my own eyes. So I was a little sceptical, but let's try it. Let's see how it works, and it does. I'm very confident now that it provides excellent feedback and is going to be the way forward.
And I'll bring James in here. James, when a trainer rings you up, and you've trained horses yourself, you've trained for 22 seasons, when a trainer rings you up and says, well, hang on a minute, you've trotted this up and you say my horse is lame, it always moved like that every day of its life. I know what do you say to that?
Well, all vets think they're trainers and all trainers think they're vets. So
when you were a trainer, did you think you were a trainer or a vet?
I was a trainer. He knew a bit about veterinary medicine. It's a difficult conversation to have that. But I do think there is importance in not just making it about technology and abdicating the responsibility of decisions to a computer, so you end up with a computer says no situation, you've got to have horsemanship. Now, that is not just the trainer, but that's the vet as well. And to echo what Brian was saying, I think, there's real importance in developing and educating and teaching and training vets to become part of that process of assessing the suitability to race. But you've also got to educate, I keep coming back to the word educate, the training community as well. Every jurisdiction is slightly different. In Hong Kong, they have to ask permission to gallop the horse. In Britain, we see the horses snapshots only on race days. We've got to do other things in between to engage the trainers, their vets, to make them part of the whole decision-making process, make them part of the responsibility for continuing the social license to operate.
I mean, Hong Kong, you have this discrete, amazing population that you can monitor and collect data really quite easily on, and you've been doing it so well for so long and have become the global leader in that respect. In the United States, the majority of the horses are training on the track, so at least you've got eyes on, Josh. For Sonia and James, it's a much greater challenge, Sonia, isn't it?
Yes, of course, we have training center and we have also private training center. So we never have the same conditions like in Hong Kong, which is the best thing when we want to do research. And we have also to learn from FEI and sports because they do pre-sports examination, but it's always a panel decision, not only on the vet, because it's difficult when it's only the vet who decides the horse is not fit to compete.
Clearly, the aspect of this conversation that we haven't really delved into so far is performance-enhancing medication, and obviously Charlie Sheila talked a bit about that before lunch. But it's important, James, in this regard, isn't it? Because for you as a regulator to sleep well at night, you want to know that horses are not being put under unnecessary risk because of nefarious practice. Absolutely,
yeah, and that comes from having a robust strategy of testing, both at post-race and out of competition, and extending it to outside of the licensed horse's life as well. And knowing that the laboratory you use is one of the 6 reference laboratories in the world, so that you have confidence in the testing process, not only in that you're going to catch people, but also an effective deterrence.
I know you wanted to pick up on this, Brian.
Yeah, not so much on the performance-enhancing drugs, but on, I don't know if I emphasised strongly enough about the use of medication in training, and I went through the phase of, we're trying to detect as early as we can when horses are going amiss. Now, indiscriminate or injudicious use of medication during training makes it much harder to be able to detect those subtle warning signs, and the post-race bute or the post-training gallop bute. It means you miss that opportunity to pick up those subtle signs early, and things look great, carry on, all good, but underneath there is something happening. And it's one of the issues with Lasix to me that, it's a long story, but anti-inflammatories, joint injections, whatever, they do mask those subtle signs that are so important for us to be able to pick up the early signs and be able to do something about it. We push on and then we've got a damaged athlete.
And you were talking a little bit about getting to a point where you understand when an athlete might be in that danger zone, and then you scan. I wanted to ask Josh, from an economic standpoint, from a financial standpoint, are you equipped to take your thoroughbred care to that next level and to be doing more pre-race scanning and more scanning of athletes who might possibly be in that danger zone?
Yeah, we're certainly getting there with diagnostics. In California, the regulatory vet team can require diagnostics prior to racing. So we have a PET scan that we share with Santa Anita, also nuke scan. So in talking to the veterinary community, the technology is getting better and better, and I see us heading in that direction.
And Sonia, how about here in France in terms of actually prevention rather than cure? Where are you with inspecting and examining horses before they head to the racetrack?
We do not do that now because we are only 2 regulatory vets in France for many horses. So it's on autonomous and on the owner and trainers up to them to do that with their private vets. And then they come and it's their own decision. We are no input on that now. It doesn't mean that we are not reflecting on, but...
What about you personally in your role? Would you like to see that change
Yes.
and develop?
Yes, for sure. And I would like to have more biomarker to make the decision because we cannot rely only on CT scan, on radio and so on. We need to have to found really new biomarkers that help us to decide.
Do you feel that you've got enough support from within your industry, and do you feel you've got enough financial wherewithal to be able to do what you want?
Yes, but we are more emphasized on anti-doping program, which is also very important. We put a lot of effort on sample in training or before the race. So it's a kind of advertising for the owner. Be careful, we are there and we show you. But it would be better if we can also improve our test before.
Yeah, so you prioritize that and then you move on to the next phase.
Yeah, because it needs a lot of financial support, and so we are all in the same industry. We know that it's not easy, so we have to prioritize some.
And James, where is the UK on this at the moment? Or Great Britain, I should say.
Well, everything's always moving and improving. I mean, I think you're looking at a jigsaw puzzle here. You know, you've got different technologies, and conferences like this encourage the exchange of ideas. One of Brian's ideas about measuring mRNAs, we did a pilot last year that we can actually measure those in saliva. You don't have to take blood samples. Things are moving on all the time. So you've got all the diagnostic tools, you've got the biomarkers, you've got the biometrics. At the moment, we are basing ourselves more on just looking at the horses before racing, but that's all what's coming down the line, and we need to be keeping up with that and making sure we use it appropriately.
Just edge away from the science for a little while and go back to the impact of catastrophic injury on the industry as a whole. And Josh, I'd like to canvass your opinion. You talked about 2019, which was the annus horribilis for Californian racing and American racing in many respects. But this year, we've heard about it this morning, the spikes in Saratoga and Churchill Downs have been so high profile, so public, so much in the glare. From your perspective, how damaging has that been?
So, look, California is, a very strong media market. There is, a significant amount of attention when there is a fatality in California. Maybe not so much in some other states, but I think that is catching up. Beyond, everybody in this room and in the industry, we have the moral and ethical obligation to take great care of our equine athletes, but it's also compelling from a business perspective. Fans do not want to be involved with a sport that isn't protecting its athletes, owners and trainers. They want to know that their horses are going to be competing on racetracks that are fair and safe. And sponsors and TV networks, as you know, Nick, they want to be affiliated with a sport that is doing its very best with safety.
Well, I can only speak from my perspective. I mean, 2006, I remember the first Breeders' Cup I was working for ESPN. There were 2 fatalities in the first race that we covered. And yes, it was taken extremely seriously. And yes, it was tragic. And yes, it was in the context of quite a few incidents that year. But if something similar happened this year in the same way, in the same catastrophic way, in that same window, I think the implications would be significantly more grave, even though now, in 2023, there are actually fewer catastrophic injuries and fatalities than there were in 2006. And that was why I asked the question this morning, are we catching up with society fast enough? Are we getting there fast enough, do you think, Sonia?
I think we have to take also the lead in communication and education, and we have to explain what we do and our data and make them comparable from the year before and how we improve it and how we help our athletes to be secure. We have to take the lead. In France, we communicate a lot with Race and Care. I don't know if you know that. We do video, we do podcasts, we do communication for the public, and we do also invite schools in order they knew what we do. It's transparency. our rates are not so bad as you show, and we are all at the same level, quasi. So maybe we don't communicate enough to the public to know them what we do, our best practice. I think we try, and we try also with standard bred racing together. And I think we have to help also each racing has to help each other.
Exactly. And one thing that came through so strongly when you were talking, Brian, was this idea that you need to tell trainers and owners when they're getting close to that time bomb going off, or educate them sufficiently that they have an idea when that time bomb's going off, and they need to see it in those terms rather than things being freak accidents all the time. You also talked about making sure that a racing surface was maintained well enough to diminish the likelihood of this happening. What do you make of the world's racing surfaces as a whole, and where can they improve?
It's a very interesting and controversial topic. There certainly are differences between surfaces, and to me the best surface will always be good grass. But it depends on where you are. Sometimes it would be very nice to have a synthetic track, but the climate doesn't work. I think we probably need to look at the geometry of tracks as well, but that requires major engineering works that would just not be practical. So it's there are differences. There certainly, I think, are surfaces that are safer in particular environments than others. And what that comes down to is not so much a sudden misstep or something, but just the fact that a type of surface will consistently put more pressure on a horse's legs, and it plays into that bone fatigue issue. If a surface is shifting, or if a horse has to struggle to maintain stability around a bend, that all applies extra stresses, and sometimes that can be enough to just pop, a pre-existing problem. So good turf is the best surface, I think, well maintained, but that is a big task, and it doesn't suit a lot of racing systems. The Hong Kong track is American style dirt, which works well in our environment. Is it a perfect track in terms of injury? Maybe, but to be able to deliver a synthetic track in our environment might be quite challenging. So there are many factors we have to take into account.
Josh, the Dalmar Thoroughbred Club, you've been in and out of synthetic surfaces. Where are you at kind of spiritually with that concept now yourself?
So as Nadja said in the earlier panel, we need to take a hard look at the research, the data. But I'll echo what Brian said. I think climate has a lot to do with the surface. We have, tempting the racing gods here again, but we have been incredibly safe and successful with a dirt surface at Del Mar. Since 2018, we've been among the safest tracks in North America. So I think definitely there are some climates where synthetics work. Is California one of them? We'll see.
James, did you want a quick word on this, and then I'm going to get...
Just quickly, yes. I think you've got to differentiate between a training surface and a racing surface. I mean, our numbers at home clearly show that the turf is the safest surface to race on, but you can't keep training on the same grass, so you have to have a good training surface, and synthetics would be my choice, yeah.
For training?
For training on, yeah.
Let's take a couple of questions. We're running a little over, so we'll rattle through if we can. Yes? Sorry, I couldn't get the mic to you in time.
Yeah, thanks very much. Craig Sewan from the IFHA. Great presentation, Brian, and a very interesting discussion. Look, we know that there are workforce shortages more generally in the industry, but there is an ever-increasing and developing shortage of equine vets around the world, and more particularly regulatory vets. I think Sonia might have hinted at that as part of her response. And to the point where some jurisdictions are struggling to either maintain or recruit regulatory veterinarians. I just wanted to know whether you had any sort of comments or insights into what sort of impact that might have on protecting our equine athletes.
Who wants to take that? James?
I think it's a significant challenge, not just in the treating vet, but in the regulatory vet. People with experience, people wanting to make that their career, and I think we need to, we being the veterinary industry at this point, but also in conjunction with the racing industry, need to give a career path, a clear career path. I mean, one of the things young vets like to do or feel obliged to do is to get further certification after graduating, and I think we could develop a racing-led certificate that could have international recognition that would help drive young vets into racing, whether it's as a treating vet or a regulatory vet, as a chosen career path.
Got a question here from Greg Nichols.
Thanks, Nick. Greg Nichols, Racing Australia. A topical and contemporary issue is the occurrence of career-ending and catastrophic industry injuries in major Group 1 events. And I was intrigued, Brian, by your comment that the industry potentially runs the risk of over-regulation, or others may characterise it as overreaction. And I know you appreciate where I'm leading to. Racing Victoria introduced some very stringent rules which have been modified, probably not to the extent that the International Training Fraternity would like, but they've been modified. Do you see that level of regulation being de rigueur for all, or should it be considered to be implemented for all races that comprise, say, the world's top 100 Group 1 events as a introductory measure to a comprehensive program of understanding the incidence of horses that may break down?
I understand completely why Racing Victoria did what they did. I was in the middle of it for a while. They faced an extremely difficult situation, and they had to take action and quite significant action. So totally get that, but I wouldn't. I don't think I would push for it to be done for more widely unless there was some specific reason for doing so. And there were specific circumstances in Victoria that made those visiting horses at higher risk, and we could discuss those at some time, but they were identifiably a group that was at significantly higher risk than local horses and horses participating in other international races. So unless there is some evidence that we're facing a particular threat, I'd rather go further upstream and look at that monitoring of horses with the biometrics, biomarkers, thorough veterinary examinations before I'd jump in and sort of mandate, quite invasive in some ways examinations.
Yeah, I don't want you to think that I'm a leader of the Racing Victoria cheer squad. The question wasn't meant to validate their decision. The question was really about establishing a standard that may prove constructive for the future.
Well, Greg, I mean, a global standard. Yeah, well, in which case then we kind of need to take a view from the rest of the panel and see whether in the US, in France, in GB, this could be applied or should be applied. I'm sensing you're thinking no, and you agree with Brian.
Well, I think Racing Victoria were dealt a hand with an existential threat, and their reaction was proportional to their threat level at that time. And you just used the word threat, Brian. The threat level isn't the same around the rest of the world at different times, and so you have to have a proportional response to the threat that each jurisdiction is facing. But I do think it is important to have an international standard for horses before they travel, so that the receiving nation has knowledge, has an understanding and a confidence that horse is at an acceptable level.
Just as an aside, the International Movement of Horses Committee had a special ad hoc meeting at the time of the ICRAV in Hong Kong just recently, specifically really to address this issue. And it was very well attended and very enthusiastically attended or participated. So from that, a working group was formed to look at very many issues associated with horse movement, but very particularly about the suitability to race and the tests that will be done. So That group's being formed now. It's an international group of multiple or many different racing authorities, and it will be looking at exactly that.
Viv Moodley.
Thank you, Nick. Can you hear me?
Did I get it right?
Yes. Am I on?
You're on.
So, Nick, I just want to change the narrative slightly. And imagine I am an anti-racing activist.
Oh, Viv, just before you become an anti-racing activist, just tell us where you're from.
Sorry, V. Moodley, National Horse Racing Authority of South Africa.
Excellent.
Okay, so imagine I am not V. Moodley, and I stuck into this meeting, and I watched the first presentation, and I watched the second presentation by Brian. I then send out communication to my social media people that 50% of the people working in horse racing believe horses don't want to race, followed up by a happy horse or a sound horse is a happy horse. So I can convert that and say 50% of horses are racing are unsound. You understand? To suit my own narrative. Mm-hmm. So my concern is the overarching theme of the conference is about, at our ISBC meeting, we used an acronym SAT, Social Acceptance Test. So we're looking to pass that test. Now, when Dr. Christopher says that horses that are breaking down, we should know about them. That's a very dangerous statement when we're not in a position to identify the problem today. That falls into the hands of this activist, so that's my concern. How do we handle that?
Josh, I think maybe you're the right man to answer this.
So first off, I wouldn't call those folks animal activists. I'm an animal activist, and I'm assuming most people here are animal activists. They're extremists, and we deal with them in California quite a bit, and there are a lot of the same people that want to ban Thanksgiving to save turkeys and make it illegal to get cow's milk at the grocery store. I know you're smiling, but I'm serious. These are the same people. We have a lot of positive data to point to in California on these reforms that we instituted in 2019 in terms of significant reduction in fatalities. Serious injuries have been reduced by over 50% in California over the last 3 years, and I mentioned Del Mar's safety record. So look, there's data out there to help you frame your position, but I think we have a lot of positive information that we can get out.
Does that answer your question, V? I might have to let you take it up with Josh at coffee because we're running a little over time, but thank you. Maybe just time for one or two more, and then we'll break. Lisa Jane.
Hi, I'm glad James brought up training surfaces because I wonder if this debate over racing surfaces is masking the fact that, Brian, perhaps you can answer, training surfaces have the bigger impact on race day breakdowns. And my question leading on to that is something that's been worrying me for a while is climate change and extremes of weather having a massive impact on the safety and sustainability of different training surfaces around the world. And has any work been done on that? Is there anything been done to show what is the safest and most environmentally friendly training surface that we can use every day to keep our horses safe?
Brian, do you want to just pick up on that first point first?
Well, it is a difficult area and not an easy one to research. Certainly Tim Parkin's done a lot of work with the Jockey Club in the US about the safety of various surfaces for racing. But most of the wear and tear that happens in horses happens during training, and training surfaces are also of critical importance. And you mentioned climate. Well, if we have extremes of climate and heavy rain, the cleverest of track managers will be severely tested. It's that will be an issue, and trying to maintain a safe, consistent surface under extremes of weather and climate is going to be difficult. Now, I'm not aware of much work that's being done about that, and certainly when we do the literature searches, there's a lot of speculation, I guess, but there's nothing that gives me confidence to be able to make a statement. James?
Oh, just to throw one thing in there, we can they all have trade names and different surfaces. We're trying to compare apples and pears or apples and apples, but they all change over time. So there's another factor of how long has that surface been down. My experience from UK is that they have a sort of life expectancy of about 6 or 7 years before they need serious remedial therapy. And the race courses now seem to be getting that in ahead of that time. So you've got to think about how long that surface has been there and not just go, that's Tapeta or that's Polytrack. There are other factors to consider as well.